At 10, a Memphis police officer dead in a supposed suicide. Her family says it's murder. The local I team exposes the evidence that's raising their suspicions.
You know, it's been 2 years since Sonia Henderson died from a point-blank gunshot to the chest.
And the 37-year-old was a veteran Memphis police officer. The district attorney's office says her death was a suicide. Henderson's family members are convinced she was murdered.
They are suing an MPD sergeant that they claim is responsible for Henderson's death. Local I-team investigator Maria Hallas joins us live in the studio now. And Maria, what's going on with all of this?
Good evening, Brandon and Katina. The family filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit against a Memphis police sergeant. I spoke with that sergeant. She says she had nothing to do with Sonia Henderson's death. Family members claim Memphis police and the district attorney's office refused to aggressively pursue the case. That refusal, the family says, prevents justice for their daughter and intensifies their grief. Kenneth Polk still gets emotional when he talks about the day he discovered his stepdaughter, Memphis police officer Sonia Henderson, shot dead in her Cordova home.
And so when he told me she was dead, I didn't know who to call. I couldn't believe it.
Henderson grew up in Memphis and was a 15-year veteran of the Memphis police force. Twyla Russell is Henderson's sister.
Always loved to help people, motivated to be everything, and wanted to see everybody do good in life.
The autopsy report says Henderson died of a single gunshot wound to the chest and that police are not suspicious of foul play. The medical examiner ruled the death a suicide. But Henderson's family, including her mother, remain convinced Henderson did not kill herself.
She had called me on the 10th, my birthday, right before it happened. And she said, "Mama, what you want for your birthday?" I said, "Well, just anything." She said, "Well, I'll call you back."
Relatives say Henderson had career and travel plans in Las Vegas. She was about to board a plane the week she died to look for a home with her sister in Vegas. The officer had already plunked down more than $20,000 for a business program, according to her sister, with the eventual goal of opening up hospitals in third world countries. In a lawsuit, the family alleges Sergeant Alpha Gail Hines and Hines' sister plotted to lure Henderson away from her home and shot her in the chest, causing her death. Hines is a Memphis police officer who worked crime scene investigation. Family members say Sergeant Hines was a family friend, claimed she had keys to Henderson's home and was seen by neighbors there frequently. Documents show Hines was listed as the beneficiary on Henderson's life insurance policy.
$150,000 policy payable to Alpha Gail Hines, listed as a friend.
Family members say Hines showed no emotion after Henderson's death and seemed more intent on collecting the money she thought Henderson had left her. But what really solidified the family's suspicions was a handwritten note they claim was written 3 months before Henderson's death, listing life benefits, the funeral home, and the same poem Hines submitted for the funeral program. Despite their concerns, the family claims MPD was determined from the start to only consider the officer's death a suicide.
The officers stated going into it that they were investigating it as a suicide. They would investigate it as nothing other than a suicide. And they would definitely not investigate any police officers.
Claiborne Ferguson is a Memphis criminal defense attorney who's not involved in this case but agreed to weigh in on the investigation.
Their training should indicate to them that they can't make that decision until after all the evidence is gathered, all the witnesses, possible witnesses, are investigated, all the questions are asked, and they've received the answers to those questions.
About 1 year after Henderson's death, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took over the case. TBI completed its report, but it is sealed, and the DA's office says it will not prosecute anyone in Henderson's death. The family says no MPD or TBI investigator sat down and interviewed them about their concerns.
I think the family should have been interviewed. The first people you talk to are friends and family. That's who you ask when you're dealing with somebody to determine whether or not they were suicidal.
I've been fighting hard for justice for her because I know she did not take her own life.
Henderson's sister says she will not give up. Now again, I spoke with Sergeant Hines, who's accused in this lawsuit. She said she had nothing to do with Henderson's death. I also asked the assistant district attorney about the factual allegations we mentioned in this story that the family finds suspicious. The assistant DA did not dispute those allegations, but said they were not enough to prosecute. Tomorrow night, we'll hear from the DA about the facts he says show Henderson took her own life. For the Local I Team, I'm Maria Hallas.
Well, Local I Team's Maria Hallas joins us now live in the studio. Maria, last night we heard the family side of the story. So what does the DA's office have to say about this?
Good evening, Kelly and Rudy. Senior Assistant District Attorney Tom Henderson told me he's sensitive to the family's grief, but he says judge the case by the evidence, and that evidence shows Sonia Henderson committed suicide. Sonia Henderson grew up in Memphis and served the Memphis Police Department for 15 years.
I missed her personality, her smile, and checking on me all the time, and the beauty and how she loved God.
Her stepfather found Henderson dead in her Cordova home on April 11, 2014, a single gunshot wound to her chest. Her immediate family and former husband, also a police officer, remain convinced she was murdered.
It bothers me. Well, I know she didn't kill herself. I know she did.
Senior Assistant District Attorney Thomas Henderson, no relation to the officer, disagrees.
She was under psychiatric treatment. She was supposed to be taking medicine. She'd sent a text message saying she'd quit her medicine. She'd been researching suicide on her computer, and she was found dead of a single gunshot wound to the chest with her own pistol. And she talked to her doctor about being suicidal.
Officer Henderson's family acknowledges she saw a psychiatrist and had thought about suicide, but say that's not the whole story. They point to her ambitious plans to move to Las Vegas with her sister.
Within 3 days, she was headed to Las Vegas. She had already applied for a fingerprinting job with the Las Vegas Police Department. And so she was already looking ahead.
Claiborne Ferguson is a criminal defense attorney who tries murder cases.
It's not implausible that this was a suicide. It could have been, but just to simply take the word of somebody else when there's all this other issues and evidence that could point to some other situation other than a suicide, and whether or not it's been investigated, until those are answered, you just don't know.
In their lawsuit, the family alleges Sergeant Alpha Gail Hines and Hines' sister plotted to lure Henderson and shot her in the chest, causing her death. Hines is a Memphis police officer who worked crime scene investigation. Hines and her sister say they had nothing to do with Henderson's death. We also asked the DA's office about the family's complaint they were never interviewed by an investigator from MPD or the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation about their concerns.
Since none of them were in town at the time, I suspect they figured they didn't know anything about the crime.
But Henderson's stepfather is the one who found her body, and virtually all of her relatives claim they were in town and available to be interviewed.
They had no idea the family had any relevant evidence, and after talking with the family, I don't think they have any relevant evidence.
I think the family should have been interviewed. The first people you talk to are friends and family. That's who you ask when you're dealing with somebody to determine whether or not they were suicidal.
Henderson's relatives say no official ever showed them MPD's crime scene investigation file.
I think the family's asking the right questions. It sounds like there's been a decision made that this was a suicide, and once that decision was made, all other evidence to the contrary was excluded. And if not, then open the file up and show it to the family so that the family can have that sense of peace.
A sense of peace Henderson's brother Otis says the family is missing.
Waking up every day is like a weight of nothing but pain and suffering. And, you know, every day that goes by, you know, we just hope and pray one day for justice.
The criminal case is closed as a suicide. The TBI file remains sealed under statutory law. For Officer Henderson's family, many questions remain. For the Local I Team, I'm Maria Hallas. Today we sat down with an attorney who will ask the court to unseal the TBI file. Memphis police officer Sonia Henderson died 2 years ago, and her family disputes claims she committed suicide. The Local I Team's report last month about their concerns attracted the representation of a prominent Memphis law firm, Ballin and Fishman.
You've demonstrated, and your readership and viewership has demonstrated that this is a matter of public concern. I think that the community deserves to know what the investigation into a police officer's death, and certainly the family deserves to know what investigation was done.
Sam Fargetstein works with Leslie Ballin, the lead attorney on the case. They're preparing to seek a court order unsealing the report from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation into Henderson's death. All TBI reports are sealed by law.
It bothers me. It bothers me. Well, I know she didn't kill herself.
Henderson's family, including her stepfather Kenneth Polk, remain convinced she was murdered and brought a wrongful death lawsuit against the Memphis police sergeant they claim is responsible. That sergeant says she had nothing to do with Henderson's death. The family claims Memphis police overlooked important evidence but had not been granted access to the department report until our open records request. That report states the primary issue for Memphis police was determining whether Henderson's conduct violated MPD policy in shooting herself. The determination of suicide was reached on the scene, according to the report.
I think that's a terrible way to investigate an officer's death. If you start out the process by already determining that they committed suicide when you're supposed to be determining whether or not it is a suicide or a homicide.
Claiborne Ferguson is a criminal defense attorney. He is not representing the Hendersons, but agreed to weigh in on this case. While any deficiencies in the MPD investigation may have been addressed by the later TBI investigation, because the TBI report is sealed, it is unclear how thorough the TBI investigation was.
This is obviously a unique case, and if this was an open and shut case, perhaps the TBI wouldn't have needed to get involved.
Now, the Ballin law firm says it is currently only representing the Hendersons to unseal the TBI file. Fargetstein says he plans to file court documents making the request in the next few weeks. For the local I-Team, I'm Maria Hallas. Ever since Memphis police officer Sonia Henderson